Morning, everyone. I can't do a lot of talking this morning. I'm at the tail end of 2 weeks. I've been really poorly with COVID. So I'm going to basically hand over to Sans and put the pressure on him to talk through it. So I just wanted to say that loud and say thank you to Sans for picking up the heavy lifting with this. So I've dragged my pathetic body here this morning to help do this, but my contribution is kind of done at this point. So I'm just going to introduce the first slide and then I'm going to let Sans do what he does best. So.
Okay. Right, we looked at more of the key stage 1 skills as being our drive towards our question. A bit of my literature review beforehand that drove the actual project itself for us was, as you can see on the slide, the average skills population of the whole country is around about the 2.3 grade. And that they were looking towards just a 5 GCSEs, but they should be pushing the standard up to A level. That was just a little bit of a background review on what we were doing here, but what was one of the main cruxes was the skills needed and the gaps that we were looking for to show that we have over 9.2 million people qualified at low skills level for a maximum of 3.5 million jobs. Yet we have 11.9 million people qualified with 14.8 million jobs. The gap between them was creating a lost growth of this amount. Was shocking. But to bring it back to our level at Gateshead College was filling in the gaps. We wanted to address the tiny gaps, the misconceptions right at the very lowest basic number level in topics, and to see whether that would help them move forward and be able to achieve problem solving, reasoning, communication, the AO2 and 3 level skills that were missing. We found this to be one of the key reasons as to why learners weren't progressing onto achieving their GCSE resets. In doing this, we decided to investigate addressing the key skills gaps right at a very low effect and see whether it would have a positive effect on attaining the key stage 3 topics. We thought that if we use consistent exposure to the basic topic skills and then measured against their performance and their assessments at the end of the year, or the exams at the end of the year, which, as you all know, didn't happen. The research behind our question, the motivational theory, and that teachers believing students are ready to learn, to arrive to learn at colleges, is not the case. Our theory all along has been that if they've had 11 years of one style of teaching, how can we expect another 1 year to make any difference? So we have to make sure that our 1 year is rapid, different, buzzed, and ready for them to go. The skills gap that we identified was children missing lessons due to illness. I normally get a lot of students at the beginning of the year who tell me that all they've done is been bullied, had 10 different maths teachers, gaps in their learning are quite apparent just from those levels alone. We took the EF's report about the fluency of maths and that can students, through repetition of number skills to support their learning to achieve the higher, and then using those skills to be able to follow on through using the terminology in order to apply correct formulas and methods. So we used an intervention program, a 6 weeks program at Easter, for proof of concept to actually offer one-to-one drop-in sessions, 20-minute short burst sessions across dinner time skills in between their main courses and in between our maths lessons. Constantly bringing it down to key stage 1. I think we just discussed it before. I didn't know I was going to say this at the end, but I think it's more at this point where when we use our flipped learning methods and our intervention programs, and it allows students to climb over this level of GCSE and attain good results. But we had a lot of students below just not even being able to get up there because of their lower level skills. So we introduced our drop-in sessions where we went right back down to BIDMAS, factors, multiples, negative numbers, place values. And I'm talking really low, right down to the very place value, right down to times and multiplication BIDMAS, introducing negative numbers again, reintroducing place value grids, but like taking it as low as I can to fill in all those little gaps. I think I've assumed a lot of students would come in with these minimum skills, and rapidly now over the last couple of years, it's become quite apparent they can't achieve that grade 2, grade 3 question because of this gap in their learning at lower level. Once we'd used the intervention program, once we'd applied all these key stage 1 skills, we started seeing them in the classroom where we would use our starters. This is an example of the first lesson starter, and then we'd have another 10 questions for the next lesson starter. Students would get given 1 mark for their bit of working out and then 1 mark for their answer. Once we'd started to embed these key stage 1 skills, students started to actively engage and start getting better and better scores across the term. But the difference, what we found is in some cases where the process was 10 to 15 minutes to do their starter at the beginning of the lesson, and then a further 10 to 15 minutes of just grading it and going through the working through process and the answers, as opposed to the next process we used, which was exactly the same starter, exactly the same 10 to 15 minutes of giving them time to go through it, but taking the explanation, the process, explaining them the difference of an AO1 skill to an AO2 skill, where once they'd learned multiples, could they then apply it to a lowest multiple question? 2 trains leaving the station, 1 every 5 minutes, 1 every 7 minutes. Could they then identify the key stage 1 skill that they'd learned and applied it to this style of question? Yes. As we move forward, we looked at all the data from our initial entry assessments, exit papers. We looked at, mainly because I teach a lot of the sports students, as part of my job, I'm based over at the Gateshead Stadium, so I teach a lot of the sports students where, although the whole college received the type A starters, where they were given the 15 minutes and 15 minutes discussion afterwards, I use sport just because most of us are over there and we had quite a big high cohort, where we would take the type B approach, where we would give them more explanation, explain more the formulas and the process of how the grades are given. And as everybody's aware, then we hit lockdown. But during the lockdown, we continued the same with remote learning. I would take a lot more time in the lesson, at the beginning of the lesson, to explain to the sports students why these starters work and how these starters work, and explain the formulas a lot more. And it started to show up quite rapidly. Individualized learning was improved. Out of the students that we did in both lessons 1 and 2 every week, we took the more predominant students over at sport and the 8 involved in the project and started delivering the different styles, which became quite reflective in our tracker. This is what we kept a hold of every single starter for every single lesson. You can see out of the 80 students that were involved in the 2 starters per week, so over the 26 weeks, we actually started getting quite a rapid involvement just in the starters alone and completion. As we move forward with that, we use a traffic light system to keep an eye on our students every single week. We use the flipped learning method, as we always have been, and it's been quite successful for us, where once the students have done their starters and their flipped learning and learned it in the first lesson, and then they came for their second lesson, we use a Prove It. So it's like a GCSE standard sheet of up to 10 questions, and where they can apply all their learning and all their skills. You can see the students who had on the starters, where it was just 15 minutes of completing the starter and 15 minutes of discussing the formulas, as opposed to 15 minutes of doing it and then 30 to 40 minutes of discussing each topic, discussing each breakdown of it all, was massively reflected there. In our grades here, you can see we use a red, amber, green, red being poor, right up to green being good, and then platinum is when a student is 10% over their target. It became quite apparent straight away from the sports students how effective this was becoming in their, not just their grades, but you can see there, their engagement. Once they're getting rid of these smaller learner steps, their engagement in all of the topics right across the board was quite apparent. I think Mark will agree when we came to do the assessments, sitting waiting to just push these people into exams and be tested and after all this evidence was devastating for us to not have that. But we took it as a positive thing to look forward to, where we could design our own tag assessments, our own learning assessments, and we could amend them. And we really focused on EO1, EO2, and EO3 process, where the students could apply these new skills right across the whole board. And though the results might be different to a real exam, we focused in our assessments to be very reflective of the exams. We used the results from them. We took and split our assessments, not just a grade at the end. We took them and separated the EO1 skill results and the EO2 and 3 skill results. And you can see the blue line is the whole college average of what they got in relation to their EO1 skills. And the red is sport. Not a huge difference, but a noticeable difference of the students from sport. It made quite a big difference in their ability to answer all their easy formula EO1 skills. You can see straight on here, students who did the type B process, where we spent a lot more time discussing it, had a 5.4% increase in their EO1 skills. And on a foundation paper where 50% of the paper is EO1 marks, we worked this out to be an equivalent of an increase of 6.5 marks across all 3 papers. Now, we've discussed this many a time where students have only been so far off either achieving a grade 4 or even just so far off being considered for a resit or a remark. We then take the EO2 and EO3 skills, which is where it was unbelievable, in my opinion. I think it's just, these are the ones where students struggle to answer. Oh, I can't do the big 3 and 4 mark questions. I normally just turn the page. I had active engagement right across the board. Again, you can see the blue line right across where everybody was given the starters. Everybody across the college did the same. Sport was just given an extra push in the nudge towards the EO2 and EO3 skills. The difference across the board here, the type B process where you spend time every lesson discussing this, 25% of that is EO2, 25% of that is EO3, a 14.2% increase across the board, an equivalent 17 marks increase across their 3 exam papers. Putting those both together, 23.5% marks, or 9.8% increase. I think we worked out that's on average about half of a grade increase across the board. Any student on 3.5, that's about 24 to 25 marks like that is about half of a grade increase, and even better than what the higher you get up there. Our tag assessments, we try to make them as close as possible to an actual exam. They came straight from Exam Wizard, they came straight from Edexcel. We put them in a process where we broke them down, and you could do your EO1s, you could separate to your EO2 and 3s and then percentage them together at the end. But it allowed us to actually break it down and do a bit more analysis for it. Our weekly prove-its, again, these are 10 questions straight from the GCSE question mark from Edexcel. The whole college was 53% on average, and the sports 60%. It doesn't seem like such a big difference, but when that's reflected in their exam papers, it's huge across the board. Recommendations: learners may struggle to progress to achieve GCSE resits due to their skills gaps at a much lower level. For us, this means developing these skills alongside their GCSE resit topics can be beneficial. Filling in those tiny little gaps which can be easily overlooked. to address those skills gaps by consistently focusing on the year 1, year 2 to year 3 criteria and letting the students know what style of questions there were, when they needed to apply just a quick formula to then having to take formulas out and apply this new skill they'd learned is enough to support the current GCSE topic. What's next? Well, these findings for us have already influenced our curriculum for next year. They've given us insights into how best to address these skills, front loading, filling in the gaps and the misconceptions, not just what we would assume is, what gaps are you missing to get from a 3 to a 4? It's now taken us right back to, I don't know, to level 1, minimum, grade 1, fill in those lower level gaps in to allow them to very quickly go up the learning scale. It's changed our approach on our flipped learning, hence the finishing slide there where we now got flipped learning 2.0. I'd like to thank Michelle for taking up the mantle of flipped learning and her team down there. And it's lovely to see it being branched out across the country. But we've now got 2.0. And if anybody would like to jump on and come on that, or Michelle's quite welcome to come back up and see what our new design is for next year. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'd like to keep it within our 10-minute time slot and we'd like to end it there. So any questions? You're more than welcome.